$20, folded once, tucked into the pocket of a pressed pair of trousers. That single bill held more weight than paper and ink. It held a week of decisions, a month of hopes, and a history that nobody was writing down yet. Think about what it meant to hold $20 in your hand in 1965. Not just what it could buy, but what it cost to earn it, where you were allowed to spend it, and what it said about you that you had it at all. That $20 bill tells a story that textbooks skipped over, that dinner table conversations carried forward, and that deserves to be told with the full weight it has always carried. Today, we're walking through 8 windows into what $20 meant in Black America in 1965, what it bought, what it couldn't buy, and what it revealed about a world that was changing fast, but not nearly fast enough. Let's start with the most fundamental thing a $20 bill could touch: the dinner table. Picture a Saturday morning in a kitchen somewhere in the American South, or in a narrow row house in Chicago, or a third-floor apartment in Harlem. The air smells like coffee and something frying. A woman moves between the counter and the stove with the kind of efficiency that comes from years of stretching what you have into what you need. On the table, a list: eggs, bread, chicken, potatoes, milk. With $20 in her purse, that woman could walk into a grocery store and come back with a full week's worth of food and change rattling in her pocket. That is the breathtaking raw power of $20 in 1965. A dozen eggs cost 53 cents. A pound of white bread was 21 cents. Broiler chicken, and chicken was a staple, a Sunday ritual, a celebration food, ran 29 cents a pound. 10 pounds of potatoes cost 94 cents. A half gallon of fresh delivered milk was 53 cents. You could build a week of breakfasts, lunches, and dinners for a family of 4 for somewhere between $25 and $30. $20 got you most of the way there. In today's purchasing power, that same $20 carried the weight of roughly $206 because prices across the board were 10 times lower, and inflation that year was a barely visible 1.6%. The money was solid. The money was real, but the story of what that money could actually do for a Black family in 1965 is more complicated than any grocery receipt could show. Because here is the part that the receipt leaves out. By the mid-1960s, supermarkets, the big chain stores with their competitive prices and full selections, were following white families to the suburbs. They were abandoning Black neighborhoods with the same systematic intention that had built those neighborhoods in the first place. Redlining had drawn the maps, racial covenants had enforced them, and now the grocery stores were voting with their square footage. What that meant in practice was that the Black family with $20 in her purse was often not shopping at a supermarket at all. She was shopping at a corner store, a small neighborhood market, where the overhead was higher, the selection was narrower, and the prices reflected a captive customer base with nowhere else to go. The same chicken that cost 29 cents a pound in a suburban chain store might cost 35 or 40 cents in the neighborhood market 3 blocks from home. The same eggs, the same bread. A hidden tax levied not by the government but by geography, a geography that had been deliberately constructed to keep Black families contained and then charged extra for the containment. That $20, already powerful on paper, was quietly eroded before it ever left the wallet. Now set that grocery bag down for a moment and think about what it took to earn that $20 in the first place. In 1965, the federal minimum wage was $1.25 per hour. $1.25. A full 16-hour workday, morning until midnight, earned you exactly $20. That was the floor, the legal bottom of what an employer could pay, and enormous swaths of Black working life were not even standing on that floor. Domestic workers, the women who cleaned white families' houses, cooked white families' food, raised white families' children, had been explicitly excluded from the Fair Labor Standards Act when it was passed back in 1938. That exclusion was not an accident. It was architecture. It meant that in 1965, a Black woman doing 12-hour days in someone else's kitchen had no federal minimum wage protection at all. Her employer paid what they decided to pay, which was often far less than $1.25. More than a third of all black women in 1960 worked as domestic servants. 6 out of 10 African American women were household workers. They were the invisible economic engine of white American domesticing. Life and the law looked the other way on their behalf, with a regularity that required intention to sustain. The median black family in 1965 brought home $3,993 a year. The median white family brought home $7,251. Black families were earning 55 cents for every dollar their white counterparts made, which means that weekly, a black family at the median was taking home roughly $77. $20 represented more than a quarter of a week's income. It was not pocket change. It was a considered, deliberate, carefully managed expenditure every single time. Walk with that $20 now toward the rent. In the mid-1960s, a monthly rent in a black urban neighborhood ran somewhere between $60 and $90, which means that $20 represented approximately 1 week of the roof over your family's head. That sounds manageable until you understand the conditions under which black families were renting and what those conditions had already cost them in stolen opportunity. The Federal Housing Administration had spent decades ensuring low down payment mortgages for white families while drawing red lines through black neighborhoods and declaring them too risky for investment. The GI Bill gave returning World War II veterans access to home loans that built the white middle class one suburb at a time. And black veterans were systematically denied access to those same benefits. The result was that in 1965, roughly the same percentage of black families owned their homes as own their homes today. About 41%. Think about that. 60 years of economic history, an entire era of civil rights legislation and hard-fought progress, and the black homeownership rate has barely moved. Because the walls built by redlining, by contract selling, by blockbusting, by racially restrictive covenants, those walls were not easily unmade. Black families who could not get conventional mortgages were pushed toward predatory lenders who charged punishing interest rates. Real estate agents sold property to black buyers at inflated prices, while using those same black buyers' presence to panic white neighbors into selling cheap, a practice called blockbusting that made agents rich and made neighborhoods bleed. $20 toward rent in 1965 was $20 that could never become equity, never become wealth, never become the thing you handed your children when they were ready to build something of their own. Now take a left turn off that block and push open a glass door with a hand-lettered sign. You're at the barber shop. The smell hits you first, and the sweet bite of talcum powder, the clean antiseptic edge of barbicide in a blue glass jar on the counter, the faint warmth of hot lather. There's a radio on a shelf, and it is absolutely playing Motown. A haircut in a black barber shop in 1965 cost somewhere between 50 cents and $1. $20 then could buy 20 haircuts, a full year of grooming for one man, or a season's worth for a family. But the barbershop in 1965 was not primarily a place you went for a haircut. It was a place you went because it was yours. Jim Crow had spent decades closing doors, closing lunch counters, closing waiting rooms, closing parks and pools and theaters. The barbershop filled the void left by all those closures. It was where men talked freely, where news traveled, where the meaning of the week got worked out in conversation. In the very week of August 1965, when President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act into law, those barbershops were buzzing with what it meant, what it really meant to have that right on paper. And then, days later, they were buzzing with something else entirely, because something had ignited in Los Angeles. The Watts neighborhood exploded in August of 1965, just days after the Voting Rights Act became law. Days. The black community in Los Angeles had watched legal victory after legal victory accumulate on paper, while their actual lives, their wages, their neighborhoods, their grocery stores, their ability to build wealth, remained strangled. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 had guaranteed equal access to public accommodations. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 had guaranteed the ballot. And still, a black family in Watts was living in a neighborhood their $20 couldn't escape, shopping at stores that charged them more, renting homes they could never own, working jobs the unions wouldn't let them into. Rights that don't fill the refrigerator eventually produce a particular kind of rage, and 1965 held both the highest legal victories and the rawest human fury of the modern civil rights era in the same calendar month. That is the world in which that $20 bill existed. That is the air through which it changed hands. Let's talk about what that $20 bought in beauty, and not just physical beauty, but the political and cultural kind. In 1965, a woman's press and curl at a black beauty salon ran between $2 and $4. $20 bought 5 to 10 visits, nearly a season of beauty salon appointments. But by 1965, something was shifting in those salon chairs. The natural hair movement was emerging as an assertion, a declaration that the validation of white beauty standards no longer held power over how black women chose to wear their own hair. The natural look became the hallmark of black rebellion, historians would later write, and served as a reminder to white America that its validation of black hair no longer mattered. The salon, like the barber shop, was becoming a political space. The woman in the chair was not just getting her hair done. She was in conversation with an idea about who she was allowed to be. Turn now toward the record store, because in 1965, you cannot talk about Black America without talking about Motown. A vinyl album cost between $3 and $4. $20 bought 5 albums? 5. In 1965, the Supremes alone released 3 #1 hits. Stop, In the Name of Love, Back in My Arms Again, and I Hear a Symphony, all in the same calendar year. James Brown released Papa's Got a Brand New Bag and essentially invented funk in a single 3-minute recording. Motown was not just music. It was the sound of a community that was being told every day in 100 different ways that it did not matter. And the music was saying something different. Berry Gordy had built a black-owned company whose records were played in white living rooms across America, whose artists crossed over every boundary the culture tried to draw. Motown was one of the rare economic success stories of that world, proof that black creative genius, when given even a partial foothold, could produce something the entire country wanted. Those 5 albums you brought home for $20 were not entertainment, they were evidence. There is one more stop on this walk through 1965, and it is the one that reveals something profound about what money actually means when the person spending it does not have full human dignity in the place they're spending it. The department store. By 1965, black shoppers were welcome in many stores. Their money was accepted. Their dollars were green. But in most of those stores, black customers were not permitted to try on clothing before purchasing it. They could not return items that did not fit. They were often ignored on the sales floor, refused credit that was routinely extended to white customers, and denied access to the store restaurant while their money was welcomed at the cash register. A pair of men's dress shoes cost $8 to $12 in 1965. A woman's dress ran $5 to $15. A child's school outfit could be had for $3 to $6. $20 could dress one adult, if they guessed right on the size, because guessing was all they were permitted to do. The dollar spent equally. The dignity did not. And that asymmetry, full payment, partial humanity, is the hidden ledger of everything this $20 bill passed through. What you begin to understand, standing back and looking at the full picture, is that $20 in Black America in 1965 was doing something extraordinary and exhausting at the same time. It was stretching to cover groceries in stores that charged more. It was stretching toward rent in apartments that should have been mortgages. It was buying haircuts in the only spaces where a man could speak freely. It was carrying a family's cultural life home in a paper sleeve. It was navigating stores that took the money and withheld the respect. Every single transaction was an act of negotiation with a world that had been specifically designed to limit where that $20 could go and what it could become. The economists who studied this period would later write that the greatest economic gains for Black Americans in the post-civil rights era came between 1965 and 1975, which means 1965 was not an arrival. It was a beginning, the very bottom of a very long climb, and the people climbing were doing it with $20 bills that had to work harder, stretch further, and carry more than any $20 should ever have to carry. There is something that gets lost in the distance of 60 years, not just the prices, though those prices are astonishing, those eggs at 53 cents and that chicken at 29 cents a pound, and that record album for $3 and change. What gets lost is the particular quality of intention that those $20 bills carried. The deliberateness. The grandmother who sat at the kitchen table on Friday night with a list and a pencil, allocating every dollar before the week began. The father who pressed his trousers the night before payday and walked into that department store knowing he would pay full price for clothes he was not allowed to try on, and did it anyway with a dignity the store's policies could not touch. The mother who sat in the beauty salon chair and decided, maybe for the first time, that her hair was not a problem to be solved, but a crown to be worn. The young man who saved $3.50 and walked out of the record store with a Supremes album under his arm and felt, for the length of that vinyl, like the world belonged to him. Those people were not defined by the $20 they had. They were defined by what they made with it. The meals, the beauty, the music, the conversation, the community built in barbershop chairs and beauty salon stations, the stubborn, persistent act of living fully inside a system that was actively trying to make full living impossible. That is what $20 bought in Black America in 1965. Not just groceries, not just rent, not just records. It bought proof over and over that a people could not be reduced to what the economy said they were worth. Thank you so much for spending this time with us on this journey back into one of the most powerful and complex moments in American history. If this trip down memory lane moved something in you, hit the like button. It means more than you know. Share it with someone who remembers this era or someone who needs to understand it. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe and stay close. We've got more history worth remembering right here